I always thought betrayal would come with warning signs, a coldness in her eyes, a distance in her voice, a late-night phone call that didn't feel right. But nothing prepared me for the day my wife, the woman I'd built my life around, packed her bags and left for Mexico with the office boy, a kid half her age, barely scraping by, who used to bring us both coffee with trembling hands. She didn't even leave a note. I found out from a neighbor who saw her loading suitcases into a taxi at dawn, the so-called office boy standing awkwardly by her side, his cheap duffel bag slung over his shoulder. My world didn't just fall apart that morning, it exploded. If you've ever been blindsided by someone you trusted, or if you know the pain of watching your life unravel in a single day, please subscribe, like, and share your story in the comments. Your support means more than you know, and you might help someone else who's living through the same heartbreak. The first shock was the silence. No calls, no texts, not even a goodbye. I wandered through our house in a daze, every room echoing with memories, her laughter in the kitchen, the scent of her perfume on the pillows, the framed photos of our vacations, now mocking me from the walls. I tried to call her, but her number was disconnected. I called her office, and the receptionist's voice was tight and awkward. "She's no longer with the company, sir." I asked about the office boy, Miguel I think his name was, and got the same answer. Gone. Just like that. The second shock came a week later when I checked our joint bank account. She'd drained it, every last dollar. The savings we'd built for years, the emergency fund, even the money set aside for our daughter's college. All gone. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty balance, my hands shaking with rage and disbelief. I called her parents, desperate for answers, but they were just as stunned as I was. She said she needed a break, her mother whispered, voice trembling. We thought she was just going on a trip. A break? From what? From me? From our life? Days blurred into nights. I stopped going to work, stopped answering friends' calls. I couldn't face the pity in their voices, the awkward silences when they didn't know what to say. I started drinking, just a little at first, then more, anything to numb the ache. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I heard her voice in the hallway, only to find the house empty and cold. I started to wonder if I'd ever really known her at all. Then the third shock, a letter from Mexico. Not from her, but from a lawyer. She wanted a divorce. No explanation, no apology, just a list of demands. She wanted the house, the car, half of what little I had left. She wanted to erase me from her life, as if I were nothing more than a bad memory. I stared at the letter, my anger boiling over. How could she do this? How could she throw away everything we'd built for a fling with a boy who couldn't even afford his own apartment? But the real twist came when I started getting calls from unknown numbers. At first, I ignored them, but the messages piled up. Mr. Anderson, this is the Mexico City Police. We need to speak with you regarding your wife. My heart pounded as I called back, fear and curiosity warring inside me. The officer's voice was clipped and formal. Your wife has been involved in an incident. She's safe, but she's requested your help. I almost laughed. After all she'd done, now she needed me. I booked the first flight to Mexico City, my mind racing with questions. What had happened? Was she in trouble? Was this some kind of scam? When I landed, I was met by a police officer who drove me to a shabby apartment building on the outskirts of the city. There, in a cramped, dirty room, I found her, my wife, looking nothing like the woman I remembered. Her hair was tangled, her clothes wrinkled, her eyes hollow with regret. The office boy was gone. She didn't say his name, but I could see the story in her face. He'd left her, taken what little money she had, and disappeared. She broke down in tears, begging me to forgive her, to help her get home. She said Mexico wasn't what she'd imagined, that she'd made a terrible mistake, that she missed our life, our family, our home. I listened in silence, my heart a storm of anger, pity, and something I couldn't name. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her she'd ruined everything. But all I could do was stare at the woman who'd once been my whole world, now reduced to a shadow by her own choices. I stood in that cramped Mexico City apartment, staring at the woman I once called my wife. She looked up at me with swollen eyes, her hands trembling as she tried to explain. "He said he loved me," she whispered, voice cracking. "He promised we'd start a new life here, but as soon as the money ran out, he was gone. He took everything, even my passport." I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sorrow. The woman who'd emptied our accounts and vanished with a boy half her age was now stranded, penniless and desperate. She begged me to help her get home. "Please, I have nothing left. I was wrong. I made a mistake." I wanted to turn away, to leave her in the mess she'd made. But years of shared memories and the echo of our daughter's laughter haunted me. I agreed to help, but not out of love, out of a sense of closure. I called the embassy, arranged for her emergency travel documents, and booked her a flight back to the States. The whole time, she clung to me, apologizing, promising she'd change, swearing she'd never betray me again. On the flight home, she tried to hold my hand. I pulled away. The pain was still too raw, the betrayal too deep. She spent the entire journey alternating between tears and silence, staring out the window as if searching for the life she'd thrown away. When we landed, I drove her to a cheap motel and handed her a prepaid phone. "You can call your parents," I said, "but you're not coming home with me." She broke down again, sobbing. But I walked away. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I have nothing left. Please, just let me stay for one night." Against my better judgment, I let her in. She slept on the couch, curled up like a child, and in the morning she was gone, leaving behind a note. "Thank you for reminding me what kindness looks like." I thought that was the end, but a week later I received a letter from her lawyer. She was suing for spousal support, claiming she was entitled to half of everything I owned. The betrayal was complete. The woman who'd abandoned me, drained our accounts, and run off with another man was now demanding a share of the life I'd rebuilt without her. I fought back. I hired the best attorney I could find, gathered every piece of evidence, bank statements, travel records, even Miguel's testimony. The court battle was brutal. But in the end, the judge ruled in my favor. She got nothing, no money, no house, no second chance. The day the verdict came down, I sat alone in my kitchen, staring at the empty chair across from me. I felt a strange mix of relief and grief. I'd won, but at what cost? The life I'd built was gone, replaced by something colder, harder, but also stronger. I realized that sometimes justice isn't about getting back what you lost. It's about learning to live without it. The weeks after the court verdict felt like living in a strange new world. I was free, but the silence in my house was heavier than ever. Every morning, I'd sit at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from me, wondering how a life built on trust could unravel so completely. Friends called, offering congratulations, but their voices were tinged with pity. "At least you got justice," they'd say. But justice, I realized, was a cold comfort when your heart still ached. One evening, as I was sorting through old photos, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. On the other end was Miguel, the office boy. His voice was shaky, almost apologetic. "I know I have no right to call you," he began, "but I thought you should know the truth." I braced myself for another round of blame, but what he said next stunned me. "She lied to both of us. She told me you were abusive, that you didn't care about your family. I believed her, but when the money ran out, she turned on me too. I'm sorry for my part in all of this." I hung up, feeling a strange sense of closure. The story I'd told myself of a scheming office boy and a weak wife wasn't the whole truth. The real betrayal was deeper, more complicated, and somehow even more painful. I realized I'd spent months hating people who were just as lost as I was. But the shocks weren't over. A week later, I received a letter from my ex-wife. It wasn't another legal threat, but a handwritten note. "I know I've lost everything," she wrote. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I'm getting help. I'm in therapy. I'm trying to understand why I did what I did. I hope someday you can remember the good years, not just the end." I read the letter 3 times, my emotions swinging between anger, sadness, and a strange bittersweet relief. Meanwhile, my daughter, caught in the crossfire of our broken marriage, began to drift back into my life. At first, our conversations were awkward, full of long silences and careful words. But slowly, we started to rebuild. She told me about her own struggles, her anger at both of us, her fear that she'd never have a family of her own. I listened, really listened, for the first time in years. I realized that the greatest casualty of betrayal isn't always the marriage. It's the trust between parent and child. Then, out of nowhere, another shock. My ex-wife's parents reached out. They invited me to dinner, saying they wanted to apologize for how they'd treated me during the divorce. I almost refused, but curiosity got the better of me. At their house, over a meal that tasted of old memories, they admitted they'd been wrong. "We believed her lies because we wanted to," her father said quietly. "But we see now that you were the one holding everything together." The apology was unexpected, and for the first time, I felt the weight of blame begin to lift. But the most unexpected twist came when I received a job offer from a company in Mexico City. They'd heard about my story through mutual friends and wanted me to consult on a project. At first, I laughed at the irony. Mexico, the place where my life had fallen apart, was now offering me a fresh start. But the more I thought about it, the more it felt like fate. I accepted the offer, packed my bags, and boarded a plane, this time on my own terms. Arriving in Mexico City was surreal. The city was the same, but I was different. I walked the streets where my marriage had ended. But instead of pain, I felt a strange sense of freedom. I threw myself into my work, made new friends, and even started dating again. For the first time in years, I felt alive. One evening, as I sat in a cafe overlooking the city, I received a message from my ex-wife. "I heard you're in Mexico," she wrote. "I hope you find happiness there. I'm truly sorry for everything." I stared at the message, feeling a wave of emotions: anger, forgiveness, and finally, peace. I realized then that the real victory wasn't in winning the court case or getting revenge. It was in surviving, in rebuilding, in learning to trust myself again. I'd lost everything I thought mattered, but I'd found something even more valuable: my own strength. Mexico City was nothing like the city I'd imagined during those sleepless nights back home. It was alive, louder, brighter, and more unpredictable than any place I'd ever lived. I threw myself into my new job, working long hours and learning to navigate a culture that was both foreign and strangely welcoming. My colleagues became friends, and for the first time in years, I felt like I belonged somewhere. But the past had a way of following me, even across a continent. One afternoon, as I was leaving the office, I spotted a familiar figure sitting on a bench outside the building. It was Miguel, the office boy. He looked older, thinner, his eyes shadowed by regret. He stood as I approached, his hands shaking. "I heard you were in Mexico," he said quietly. "I wanted to see you. I wanted to say thank you." I was stunned. "Thank you? For what?" He looked down. "For not destroying me, for not blaming me for everything. I lost everything too, you know. She left me with nothing. I'm working 2 jobs just to survive." There was no anger in his voice, only exhaustion. We sat together for a long time, talking about everything and nothing. He told me about his family back home, about his dreams of a better life, about how quickly love can turn into desperation. I realized then that we were both victims of the same storm. 2 men who'd been swept up in someone else's chaos. As we parted, I wished him luck, and for the first time, I meant it. But Mexico had more surprises in store. A few weeks later, I received an email from Sophia, a woman I'd met through work. She was in the city too, working as a teacher and trying to rebuild her life after her own heartbreak. She asked if we could meet just once, so she could apologize in person for the way she'd treated me when she was friends with my ex-wife. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a small cafe near the park, and she arrived looking nothing like the woman I remembered. She was nervous, her hands twisting in her lap. "I was young and stupid," she said. "I thought I was helping her, but I was just making things worse. I'm sorry for my part in all of this." Her words were sincere, and as we talked, I realized how much pain she'd carried too. We parted with a handshake, and I felt a strange sense of closure. The people I'd once blamed for my misery were just as lost as I'd been. The real villain was the woman who'd betrayed us all. But the biggest shock came when I received a letter from my ex-wife. She was back in the States, living with her parents, unemployed and alone. The letter was long, rambling, and full of regret. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," she wrote. "But I want you to know I'm sorry. I ruined everything. I lost you, I lost him, I lost myself. I hope you find happiness even if it's not with me." I read the letter 3 times, my emotions swinging between anger, pity, and a bittersweet sense of relief. I realized then that forgiveness wasn't about letting her back into my life. It was about letting go of the pain she'd caused. I wrote back, a short note: "I hope you find peace. I already have." Meanwhile, my daughter began to visit me in Mexico. At first, she was distant, unsure of how to bridge the gap the divorce had created. But as we explored the city together, walking through markets, sharing meals in crowded restaurants, laughing at the chaos of city life. We started to heal. She told me about her own struggles, her anger at both of us, her fear that she'd never trust anyone again. I listened, and for the first time, I felt like I was truly present in her life. Then one evening, as we sat watching the sunset over the city, she turned to me and said, "Dad, I'm proud of you. You didn't let what happened destroy you. You built a new life. I want to do the same." Her words brought tears to my eyes. I realized that the greatest gift I could give her wasn't a perfect family, but the example of resilience. But the story wasn't over. One morning, as I was leaving my apartment, I found my ex-wife, waiting outside. She looked nothing like the woman who'd left me for another man. She was thinner, older, her eyes haunted by regret. "I came to say goodbye," she said. "I'm moving back home. I wanted to see you one last time." We talked for a long time about the past, about the choices we'd made, about the people we'd become. There were no accusations, no anger, just two people who'd survived a storm and come out the other side, changed but not broken. As she left, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I realized that closure doesn't always come with a happy ending. Sometimes it's just the quiet acceptance that life moves on, that wounds heal, and that forgiveness is possible, even if trust is not. The months that followed felt like a new chapter, one I never expected to write. Mexico City became more than just a place of painful memories. It became my home. I found myself waking up each morning with a sense of purpose, eager to see what the day would bring. I joined a local book club, started volunteering at a community kitchen, and even took up painting. Something I'd always wanted to try, but never had the courage for. Each brushstroke felt like a small act of healing, a way to reclaim the parts of myself I'd lost along the way. My daughter visited often, and our relationship grew stronger with every conversation. We talked about everything, her dreams, my regrets, the future we both wanted to build. She told me she was applying to universities in Europe, inspired by my decision to start over. "You showed me it's never too late to change your life," she said one evening as we walked through Chapultepec Park. Her words filled me with pride and a bittersweet sense of hope. But even as I built a new life, the past had a way of resurfacing. One afternoon, I received a call from my ex-wife's mother. She was gentle, her voice trembling with emotion. "She's not well," she said. "She talks about you all the time. She says leaving you was the biggest mistake of her life." I listened in silence, unsure of what to say. Part of me wanted to hang up, to close that chapter forever. But another part, the part that still remembered the good years, felt a pang of compassion. A few days later, I received a letter from my ex-wife. It was short, almost childlike in its honesty. "I'm sorry for everything. I hope you can forgive me. I hope you're happy." I sat with the letter for a long time, turning it over in my hands, feeling the weight of all that had happened. I realized that forgiveness wasn't about letting her back into my life. It was about letting go of the anger that had held me captive for so long. I wrote back. A simple note, "I forgive you. I wish you peace." As I dropped the letter in the mailbox, I felt a sense of release, as if a heavy burden had finally been lifted from my shoulders. Meanwhile, my own life continued to blossom. I made new friends, traveled to places I'd only dreamed of, and learned to find joy in the small moments. A cup of coffee in a sunlit plaza, the laughter of children playing in the park, the quiet satisfaction of a day well spent. I realized that happiness wasn't something that could be taken or given by someone else. It was something I had to create for myself. One evening, as I watched the city lights twinkle across the valley, my daughter turned to me and said, "You're the strongest person I know, Dad. You didn't just survive, you thrived." Her words brought tears to my eyes. I thought about everything I'd been through, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the long road to healing, and I realized she was right. I had survived, I had rebuilt, and I had found a new kind of happiness, one that was deeper and more lasting than anything I'd known before. But perhaps the greatest lesson was this: life doesn't always go the way we plan. People will disappoint us, betray us, and sometimes even break us. But we have the power to choose how we respond. We can let the betrayals define us, or we can use it as fuel to build something better. We can hold on to anger, or we can choose forgiveness. We can stay stuck in the past, or we can step boldly into the future. As I stood on my balcony, watching the sun set over Mexico City, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I knew there would still be hard days, moments of doubt and sadness, but I also knew that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. I had learned to let go, to forgive, and to love myself enough to start again. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt betrayed, abandoned, or lost, know this: your story isn't over. You have the power to write a new chapter, to find joy in unexpected places, and to build a life that is truly your own. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you, please like, subscribe, and share your own experience in the comments. Let's build a community where no one has to face heartbreak alone, and where every act of self-respect is celebrated. To hear more stories of justice, boundaries, and second chances, click on the next video. And remember, sometimes the greatest act of love is learning to love yourself enough to never settle for less than you deserve. As the seasons changed in Mexico City, so did I. The city that once felt like a graveyard of broken dreams became a canvas for new beginnings. I found myself drawn to the simple pleasures of life: morning walks through the park, the taste of fresh bread from the corner bakery, the sound of music drifting through open windows. Each day I felt a little lighter, a little more myself. One afternoon, I was invited to speak at a local support group for people who had experienced betrayal and loss. At first, I hesitated. What could I possibly say that would help anyone else? But as I listened to their stories, stories of heartbreak, resilience, and the long road to healing, I realized, indeed, that my own journey had meaning beyond my pain. I shared my story, not as a victim, but as someone who had learned to survive, to forgive, and to rebuild. The room was silent as I spoke, and when I finished, people came up to thank me, to share their own struggles, to tell me that my words had given them hope. That night, I walked home under the city lights, feeling a sense of connection I hadn't known in years. I realized that healing isn't just about moving on. It's about reaching back, offering a hand to those still lost in the darkness. I started volunteering more, mentoring others who were struggling to find their way. Each time I listened, each time I offered comfort, I felt my own wounds begin to close. Meanwhile, my relationship with my daughter continued to grow. She was accepted to a university in Europe, and though it meant she would be farther away, I was proud of her courage to chase her dreams. We promised to visit each other often, and I knew that the bond we'd rebuilt was strong enough to survive any distance. On her last night in Mexico City, We sat on the balcony, watching the city glow beneath us. "You taught me how to start over," she said quietly. "No matter what happens, I know I'll be okay." Her words were the greatest gift I could have received. But life, as always, had one more surprise in store. One evening, as I was closing up the community kitchen, I heard a familiar voice behind me. It was Miguel, the office boy. He looked healthier, happier, and he smiled as he handed me a small envelope. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "for forgiving me, for not letting anger win." Inside the envelope was a painting, a simple watercolor of the Mexico City skyline with the words "New Beginnings" written in the corner. I felt tears prick my eyes. In that moment, I realized how far we had all come, how much we had all grown. I hung the painting in my apartment, a daily reminder that even the deepest wounds can heal, that even the most broken stories can find a new ending. I thought about my ex-wife, about her, and Tia Sophia, about all the people who had passed through my life and left their mark. I no longer felt anger or regret, only gratitude for the lessons I had learned, for the strength I had found, for the future I was still building. As the sun set over the city, I stood on my balcony, breathing in the warm evening air. I knew there would still be challenges ahead, still be moments of doubt and fear. But I also knew that I was ready for whatever came next. I had survived the storm, and I had come out the other side not just whole, but transformed. If you're listening to this and you're struggling to find your way, remember, you are not alone. There is hope, even in the darkest moments. There is a future waiting for you, brighter than you can imagine. All you have to do is take the first step. Thank you for being part of my journey. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share your own experience in the comments. Let's build a community where no one has to face heartbreak alone, and where every act of self-respect is celebrated. To hear more stories of justice, boundaries, and second chances, click on the next video. And remember, sometimes the greatest act of love is learning to love yourself enough to never settle for less than you deserve. Spring arrived in Mexico City with a burst of color and energy. The jacaranda trees bloomed, painting the streets with purple petals, and I found myself smiling more often than I had in years. I realized that for the first time since my world had fallen apart, I was truly happy, not because everything was perfect, but because I had learned to find peace in imperfection. I started teaching English at a local community center, helping immigrants and refugees find their footing in a new country. Their stories were full of hardship and hope, and I saw pieces of my own journey reflected in their eyes. We laughed, together, struggled together, and celebrated every small victory. The work gave me purpose, and the friendships I made filled the empty spaces in my heart. Camilla and I spent long afternoons wandering through art galleries and open-air markets, sharing stories and laughter. Our relationship deepened, built not on the desperate need to fill a void, but on genuine connection and mutual respect. She taught me to dance again, awkwardly at first, then with growing confidence. We celebrated the small victories, a new recipe mastered, a painting finished, a day spent without looking back. My daughter visited often, bringing friends from Europe and filling my apartment with youthful energy. We cooked together, explored the city, and talked late into the night about everything from politics to poetry. I watched her grow into a woman, kind, thoughtful, and resilient. She told me she was falling in love, and I saw in her eyes the hope I'd once thought was lost to both of us. But even as life blossomed, reminders of the past would surface. One afternoon, I received a letter from my ex-wife's mother. She had passed away quietly in her sleep. The news hit me harder than I expected. I sat with the letter for a long time, letting the memories wash over me, the good, the bad, the lessons learned. I felt no anger, only a gentle sadness for what might have been, and a deep gratitude for the peace I'd found. Camilla was there for me, her presence a steady comfort. We talked about grief, about forgiveness, about the ways life surprises us with both pain and joy. She shared her own stories of loss, and together we found strength in our shared vulnerability. I realized that love in its truest form is not about possession or perfection, but about acceptance and growth. As the summer faded into autumn, I was invited to speak at a conference on resilience and healing. Standing before a room full of strangers, I shared my journey, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the long road to self-discovery. I spoke about the power of forgiveness, the importance of boundaries, and the courage it takes to start over. When I finished, people lined up to thank me, to share their own stories, to tell me that my words had given them hope. That night, as I walked home through the quiet streets, I felt a sense of fulfillment I'd never known before. My pain had become my purpose, my scars a source of strength. I understood now that every ending is a new beginning, and that the most important journey is the one we take back to ourselves. Camilla and I continued to build our life together, embracing the uncertainty of the future with open hearts. We made plans, small ones at first, then bigger dreams. We talked about traveling, about starting a business, about growing old together in the city that had given us both a second chance. If you're listening to this and you're struggling to find hope, remember, your story isn't over. Every heartbreak is a doorway to something new. Every loss a lesson in resilience. You are stronger than you think, braver than you know, and more deserving of love and happiness than you can imagine. Thank you for being part of my journey. If my story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share your own experience in the comments. Let's build a community where no one has to face heartbreak alone, and where every act of self-respect is celebrated. To hear more stories of justice, boundaries, and second chances, click on the next video. And remember, sometimes the greatest act of love is learning to love yourself enough to never settle for less than you deserve. Autumn in Mexico City arrived with golden light and a gentle breeze, painting the city in shades of amber and crimson. I found myself reflecting more often, not with regret, but with gratitude for how far I'd come. The pain that once felt unbearable had softened into wisdom, and the loneliness that haunted me had been replaced by a quiet contentment. Camilla and I settled into a comfortable rhythm. We spent weekends exploring the countryside, hiking in the hills above the city, and sharing long, slow dinners with friends. Our home was filled with laughter, music, and the scent of fresh bread baking in the oven. I realized that happiness wasn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. It was about the small, everyday joys that made life worth living. My daughter thrived in Europe, calling often to share stories of her studies and her growing relationship. She visited when she could, and each time I saw more of the woman she was becoming. Strong, compassionate, and unafraid to chase her dreams. We talked openly about the past, the mistakes we'd made, and the lessons we'd learned. Our bond, once fractured, was now stronger than ever. One evening, Camilla surprised me with tickets to a concert at the Palacio de Bellas Artes. As we sat beneath the stained glass dome, listening to the music swell and soar, I felt a surge of emotion. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, the heartbreak, the betrayal, the long road to healing. I realized that every note, every chord was a testament to resilience, to the power of starting over. But life, as always, had its challenges. Camilla's health began to falter, and we faced a new set of fears together. Doctors' visits, sleepless nights, and moments of uncertainty tested our strength. But we faced it all as a team, supporting each other with patience and love. I learned that true partnership isn't about avoiding hardship. It's about standing together when the storms come. During this time, I leaned on the community I'd built in Mexico City. Friends brought meals, offered rides to appointments, and sat with us during the hardest days. I was reminded again that family isn't always about blood. It's about the people who show up, who care, who choose to stay. Their kindness gave me hope, and their support helped me find the courage to keep going. As Camilla recovered, we celebrated each small victory, a good test result, a pain-free day, a walk in the park. We learned to cherish the present, to savor the moments of peace and joy that life offered. I realized that happiness isn't a destination, but a journey, a series of choices to keep moving forward, no matter what. One afternoon, as we sat on our balcony watching the city below, Camilla took my hand and smiled. "We've come a long way," she said. "I'm proud of us." Her words echoed in my heart, a reminder that healing is possible, that love can grow even in the aftermath of loss. If you're listening to this and you're struggling to find hope, remember, your story isn't over. Every challenge is an opportunity to grow, every setback a chance to begin again. You are stronger than you think, braver than you know, and more deserving of love and happiness than you can imagine. Thank you for being part of my journey. If my story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share your own experience in the comments. Let's build a community where no one has to face heartbreak alone, and where every act of self-respect is celebrated. To hear more stories of justice, boundaries, and second chances, click on the next video. And remember, sometimes the greatest act of love is learning to love yourself enough to never settle for less than you deserve. Winter arrived in Mexico City with a quiet grace. The city's energy slowing as the days grew shorter and the nights colder. I found myself drawn to the warmth of home, to evenings spent by the fire with Camilla, to the comfort of familiar routines. The journey that had begun in heartbreak and betrayal was ending in a place of peace I never thought possible. As the holidays approached, my daughter returned from Europe, her arms full of gifts and stories. We decorated the apartment together, laughing as we hung ornaments and baked cookies, the scent of cinnamon and sugar filling the air. Camilla joined us, her laughter bright and clear, her health stronger than it had been in months. Our little family, born not of blood but of choice and resilience, felt whole. One evening, as we sat around the table sharing a meal, my daughter raised her glass. "To new beginnings," she said, her eyes shining with gratitude. "To forgiveness, to love, and to the courage to start over." We clinked glasses, and I felt a surge of emotion, pride, joy, and a deep sense of fulfillment. I realized that the life I'd built, the happiness I'd found, was not in spite of my past, but because of it. But even as I celebrated, I remembered the pain that had brought me here. I thought of my ex-wife, of Miguel, of all the people whose choices had shaped my journey. I felt no anger, only compassion, for them, for myself, for everyone who has ever lost their way. I understood now that forgiveness is not a single act, but a daily practice, a choice to let go of bitterness, to embrace the present, to believe in the possibility of change. As the new year dawned, I stood on the balcony watching the city wake. The sun rose over the rooftops, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. I breathed in the crisp air, feeling the weight of the past lift from my shoulders. I knew there would still be challenges ahead, still be moments of doubt and fear. But I also knew that I was ready for whatever came next. Camilla joined me, wrapping her arms around my waist. "We made it," she whispered. "We really did," I smiled, holding her close. "Yes, we did, and we'll keep making it, one day at a time." My daughter stepped onto the balcony, her face full of hope. "What's next, Dad?" she asked. I looked at her, at Camilla, at the city that had become my home, and I felt a sense of possibility I hadn't known in years. "Whatever we want," I said, "the future is ours to write." If you're listening to this and you've ever felt lost, betrayed, or alone, know this. Your story isn't over. Every ending is a new beginning, every heartbreak a chance to grow. You are stronger than you think, braver than you know, and more deserving of love and happiness than you can imagine. Thank you for sharing this journey with me. If my story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share your own experience in the comments. Let's build a community where no one has to face heartbreak alone, and where every act of self-respect is celebrated. To hear more stories of justice, boundaries, and second chances, click on the next video. And remember, sometimes the greatest act of love is learning to love yourself enough to never settle for less than you deserve. Sometimes I stand on my balcony in Mexico City, watching the sunrise paint the sky in colors I never imagined I'd see. I think about the journey that brought me here, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the nights I thought I'd never survive. There was a time when I believed my story was over, that I'd lost everything that mattered. But I've learned that even the deepest wounds can heal, and that the end of one life can be the beginning of another. I've discovered that family isn't always about blood or shared history. Sometimes it's about the people who choose to stand by you when the world falls apart. It's about the friends who become your lifeline, the new love that grows from the ashes of loss, and the child who forgives your mistakes and walks beside you into the future. Forgiveness, I've learned, is not a gift you give to those who hurt you. It's a gift you give yourself. It's the freedom to let go of anger, to release the past, and to open your heart to new possibilities. It's the courage to say, "I deserve better," and the strength to build a life that honors your worth. If you're listening to this and you're standing at the edge of your own heartbreak, wondering if you'll ever feel whole again, know this: you are not alone. Your pain is real, but so is your resilience. Your story isn't over. Every ending is a doorway to something new. Every loss a lesson in strength. Thank you for sharing this journey with me. If my story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share your own experience in the comments. Let's build a community where no one has to face heartbreak alone and where every act of self-respect is celebrated. And remember, sometimes the greatest act of love is learning to love yourself enough to never settle for less than you deserve.